In the mid-1900s, 4 anthropologists and a guide got a rare opportunity to travel to the Madre de Dios region in Peru to meet with the Mashco-Piro tribe. But their visit took a horrific turn of events. Viewer discretion is advised. "God, it feels like trying to breathe through a wet cloth," Mary said, panting next to me. She wiped a sweaty strand of dark hair off her forehead, making a face when her hand got dirty. I just nodded, too tired to say anything back. My backpack felt heavy on my shoulders, the straps digging into my skin after hours of hiking. Further ahead, Javier, our guide, was leading the path. He moved through the jungle like it was nothing, with a smooth and easy grace. The jungle seemed like his backyard. For us, however, it was a real struggle. "How much further?" Javier glanced back. "Not far now, senor. The tribe's village lies just beyond the next rise." His words gave me a burst of energy. After weeks of planning and a dangerous journey deep into the rainforest, we were getting closer to our goal, reaching out to a tribe said to live in these wild, untouched lands. As an anthropologist, the idea of meeting a community untouched by modern civilization was the opportunity of a lifetime. To study their customs, their beliefs, their very way of life frozen in time. It was a researcher's dream come true. My colleagues and I had studied every bit of information we could find. The stories were fascinating, suggesting a tribe that avoided contact with the outside world, holding on to their old traditions with strong determination. There were also some unsettling stories about weird rituals and practices, leftovers from an ancient, savage belief system. But we didn't let that bother us. How foolish we had been. It never even crossed our minds that all of a sudden such a secluded tribe barely anyone had encountered would agree to let us come to their village, and how our guide was involved with this tribe. Now I know the reason they let us visit them. As we went up the hill, the thick bunch of leaves split apart, and I saw a little valley all by itself. Among the tall trees there were some huts with roofs made of dried grass, looking both basic and detailed. Smoke floated up from the middle of the village, carrying the smell of burning wood and something else, a raw, natural scent that made my nose twitch. Javier signaled for us to stop, putting up a rough hand to signal quiet. He walked ahead by himself, talking with a bunch of tribesmen who came out of the huts. They had painted faces with detailed red and black designs, standing out on their tanned skin. Feathers and beads decorated their bodies, moving with them like natural parts of themselves. They looked at us with both interest and caution, their stares sharp and steady. I felt like I didn't belong there, like I was intruding on their space without being invited. Javier called us over, and we walked towards the village carefully. The people from the tribe gathered around us, their eyes big and curious. Kids hid behind their mothers' clothes, laughing and pointing at us. As I looked around and took in everything in this faraway community, I felt amazed. It was like seeing a real-life picture of a world that hasn't been changed by modern life, a living piece of history from long ago. During the next few days, we joined in with the everyday life of the tribe, paying close attention to their ceremonies and ways of doing things. At first, the villagers were careful about us being around, watching us with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. But as we behaved respectfully, following their traditions and obeying their rules, they began to trust us. One day, the people in the tribe chanted loudly in the jungle. They disappeared for a while, then came back with painted stripes in black and red on their skin again. Another day, we discovered an altar, a bowl roughly cut out of stone. There were bones and feathers scattered all over, and symbols drawn in the dirt. The smell of decay made me feel sick and uneasy. Despite feeling uneasy, we continued studying them. While discussing our findings around the campfire, Javier shared a troubling story. "The tribe worships ancient gods," Javier whispered. "They're into blood and sacrifice, dark beings who demand flesh and souls." I felt a shiver as I realized what he meant. Human sacrifice? I hoped he was wrong, or just making up stories from rumors. 2 days later, during what was called the New Moon Ceremony, the true nature of the Mashco-Piro tribe came to light. They danced and chanted in a clearing with torches, moving wildly and instinctively. The air was filled with the smell of burning herbs, making our eyes and throats sting. In the middle of the ritual area was that rough altar that we saw a few days prior. I barely even got a second to ponder what this ceremony would include before they brought out a young woman, terrified and tied up. She looked like one of them, dressed like them. A sacrifice. The tribe's elders approached her with shiny, black obsidian knives. God, there was so much blood. I'll never forget the girl's screams. I couldn't move, shocked, horrified, as they slit her throat and drained her blood into that crude stone bowl. The elders scooped up a handful of blood each, drank and shouted something. Then the rest of the tribe rushed up to her lifeless body, tore her apart with their bare hands and started eating her. I couldn't handle it and threw up. My colleagues were just as shocked, looking sickened and unable to move. All we wanted to do was to leave, but we were too scared to run. If we did, they might hunt us down and kill us too. After that ritual, they kept a close eye on us, looking at us like we would be their next sacrifice. We felt like prey, on edge at every noise in the village. Mary confided in me one night, her voice trembling with barely contained panic. "Did you see the way they looked at us today? Like we were pieces of meat waiting to be devoured." I could only nod, too scared to speak. The situation felt heavy and impossible to escape. On the 6th night, the villagers came out of their huts dressed for yet another ritual, painted in red and black patterns. Mary and I watched from our camp, too scared to move as they gathered in the clearing again. The elders stood around the altar, their blades shining in the torchlight. They brought out the sacrifices. They didn't look like the natives, tied up and terrified. I almost let out a scream when I realized who they were. But before I could, Mary put a hand on my mouth. It was the rest of our expedition team, George and Lucas. I realized then that I hadn't seen them for a couple of hours, and there was no sign of Javier. We could only watch in horror as the gruesome ritual went on, the men's screams echoing in the jungle. They were laid on the altar, and the village elder slit their throat one by one. The rest of the tribespeople acted like hungry beasts, ripping flesh off the bones and eating it. The air was heavy with the smell of blood and guts. I couldn't hold it in. I threw up once more. When the ritual was over, there was nothing left of them but bones and bloodied ground. The villagers left, full and satisfied for now. We sat in silence, too scared and disgusted to say anything. The reality hit us hard. We were stuck in this awful place with no guide, surrounded by a tribe who eats human beings. And we were next, on the menu. Me and Mary took turns keeping watch, straining our eyes and ears for any sign of approaching danger. Our supplies dwindled fast and we were on edge. Javier had left us, vanishing into the jungle. Was he in on this? Did he lure us here as a sacrifice? Was that the reason he could speak their language? Was he actually one of them? "We need to leave," Mary whispered, scared, "before they pick us for their next sacrifice." But how? The rainforest was vast and confusing with no clear way out. We didn't know which way to go and had no way to call for help. Every path looked like it led further into this nightmare. We heard chanting again, getting louder. We froze as torchlight appeared in the darkness, our hearts racing. They were coming for us. We panicked and tried to grab our stuff, stumbling in the dark to get away. But it was no use. The tribe came out, surrounding us with their blades and wild looks on their faces. We were trapped, like helpless prey caught in the jaws of a ravenous predator. The elders came closer, holding their weird idols made from bones and feathers. The chanting got louder. It almost felt as if the ground was shaking. I knew then what real terror felt like. We were going to be the next sacrifice to their gods. As they lifted their blades, the torchlight making them look terrifying, I closed my eyes, ready for it to end. But part of me hoped it was all just a bad dream and I'd wake up soon. I couldn't do anything as they took Mary, overpowering her easily. They tied her up and put her on the altar. The elders surrounded her, chanting louder. One of them raised a sharp blade above his head. Mary looked at me, screaming, pleading for mercy. The blade reached her throat. Mary's scream slowly went from an ear-shrieking scream to a horrific gurgle as her body became limp and lifeless. That is a sound I'll never forget. I fought with every ounce of my strength, but it was pointless. They overwhelmed me, pinning me down. I could only watch as they ripped into Mary, tearing her apart. I'll never forget the stench of blood as the tribe devoured her. I vomited, screamed, cried, and begged for it to stop. I couldn't believe what was happening. It had to be a nightmare. But the sights, the sounds, the smells was too real. I was stuck in a nightmare with no way out. When they finished devouring Mary, they looked at me. I was next. They were still hungry and excited. I knew then I was going to die. They were going to do the same thing to me. All I could do was hope that it would be a quick and painless death. The elders came closer with their bloody blades. I fought hard, desperate to survive. But it didn't matter. They were too many and too strong. This time, they didn't seem to care about ending my life before they cut into me. My arm. The pain was unbearable. I screamed in terror and agony, and then darkness claimed me. The pain of the blade, this time cutting into my leg, jolted me awake. I realized I was still alive, barely hanging on. The tribe stood over me, ready to continue their ritual. I prepared for the pain, hoping death would come soon and release me. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Suddenly the tribe got distracted, their chanting stopping as they looked at something. There were loud cries and gunshots. I saw people dressed in military uniforms, heard gunshots, shouting in Spanish as they were pointing guns at the tribespeople. In the chaos, someone cut the ropes that tied my hands and feet. I recognized the voice. "Hang on, senor." It was Javier, our guide who had left us. He looked determined amidst all the fighting. There was shooting everywhere. The tribe fought hard, but they didn't stand a chance against the military's weapons. I felt myself being dragged, half carried, half stumbling through the chaos, Blades and spears flew past us, narrowly missing us. I don't know how long we moved through the jungle. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 3 hours. We broke through the jungle, emerging into a small clearing where a group of heavily armed soldiers awaited, and a military transport rumbled nearby. Javier yelled orders in Spanish, and they put me in the back of a vehicle. It hurt every time the vehicle moved. Only then did the darkness claim me once more. I drifted in and out of consciousness for a while, everything sort of blending together. People talked quietly, sounding worried. I remember smelling antiseptic, blood and smoke. When I woke up completely, I was in a hospital bed, wrapped in bandages, with machines beeping around me. The room was dark, with the curtains drawn. Javier got up from the chair. "Welcome back, senor. For a while we feared you would not make it. You've been out for 6 days." I opened my mouth to speak. My throat hurt, and I couldn't. It felt like I'd been screaming forever. "You are safe now, senor." I just then realized the void where my left arm and my right leg used to be. I mustered up the last of my strength to look at the stumps that was left where my limbs used to be. "I'm so sorry. Your arm and leg were very infected. I'm afraid this was our only choice, or you wouldn't have made it." He went on to tell me how sorry he was for taking us to visit the Mashco-Piro, that he didn't realize how dangerous they actually were. He told me that after that first ritual and the sacrifice of that young girl, he left immediately to get help, that it took him 2 days to arrive at the closest village, that he couldn't tell us and bring us with him because of the guards surrounding our camp. I can't blame Javier. I have no one but myself to blame. Some places are just better left untouched, and some people are better left undisturbed.